Mariana was 34 years old and had a life that many women envied in silence. Not the kind of envy that comes from social media. That manufactured envy of expensive trips and pretty clothes. It was the other kind, the deeper kind. The envy of what appears to be real. A home that smells like food. A husband who comes home and kisses your forehead. Daughters who run through the hallway barefoot. And a family that makes noise the way a happy family does. Married for 12 years to Raphael, she had built what her mother always called, with that simple wisdom of country women who came to the city. Every decent woman's dream. A warm home, a present husband, and 2 young daughters who filled every room with life. Raphael was the kind of man who seemed born to be at home. Tall, with an easy smile, and calloused hands that weren't afraid of work. Hands that knew how to fix the dripping faucet, change the hallway light bulb, assemble furniture that arrived without instructions. The kind of man that mothers-in-law adore and female friends envy without admitting it. They lived in a corner house in the neighborhood where both of them had grown up. The same street where Mariana had learned to ride a bike. The same sidewalk where Raphael, at 15 years old, had waited for her to come out of school just to walk beside her, without the courage to say anything, just walking, as if the whole world fit within those 2 blocks. That neighborhood was theirs. Every tree, every bakery, every traffic light held a memory. The corner bar where they had celebrated his first paycheck. The pharmacy where they had bought the pregnancy test at 11 at night, both of them trembling. The school where their eldest daughter had performed in her first play, dressed as a butterfly, with crooked wings, and Mariana had cried with pride, as if she were watching the debut of a great actress. And 3 blocks away lived Claudia, the older sister. Claudia was 39 years old, with dark hair and that natural authority of firstborns who never need to raise their voice to be obeyed. She was beautiful, in the way that gets better with the years, the kind of beauty that youth doesn't yet know how to carry, but that maturity wears with elegance. Married for 18 years to Henrique, a calm man, an engineer who loved Sunday barbecues and never missed one of his youngest son's games, she had 3 children. Vinicius, 16, already carrying that quiet seriousness of someone discovering who he is. Amanda, 13, too smart for her own age, who read thick books and debated with adults without asking for permission. And little Gustavo, 8 years old, who called Aunt Mariana my favourite aunt, because she always kept candy in her pocket. A habit that had started as a joke and become law. The 2 families were in practice, one every Saturday. Without fail, there was a barbecue. Sometimes at one house, sometimes at the other. The children mixing in the backyard, the adults gathered around the table, Henrique and Raphael arguing over who made the better baked rice. A dispute that never had a winner because Mariana would always diplomatically say they were equally good, and Claudia would laugh that loud laugh that filled the entire kitchen and spilled out through the window. On vacation, they went together to the beach. Always the same rented cottage in Ubatuba. Always the same chaos of 8 people in a space made for 5. Always the same sweaty, sunscreen-smelling happiness that Mariana would photograph compulsively because she was afraid of forgetting. She had this habit, photographing everything. It wasn't vanity. It was fear. The fear of someone who had already lost too many things and learned that life is slippery, that happiness passes too quickly, that you have to capture it before it escapes. She didn't know that what needed to be captured was something else entirely. Tea began 7 years earlier, on a July afternoon of thin rain. Mariana was pregnant with her second daughter, her body heavy, carrying the ancient tiredness of someone who sleeps poorly and wakes up nauseated. She had asked Raphael to go in her place to Claudia's house to deal with a problem with the car. It was natural. It was family. It was exactly the kind of thing you do when you trust someone completely. When trust has become so absolute it turns invisible, like air. Nobody knows for certain what happened that afternoon. Perhaps not even they could have explained it properly. These things rarely have an explanation that truly satisfies. There was no clear moment of decision, no conscious and cold-blooded choice. There was a slip, and then another. And then, before either of them realized what they were building, there was an entire second life growing in the dark. For 7 years, Raphael and Claudia maintained what should never have begun. Motels on Tuesday afternoons, messages deleted immediately after reading, excuses so ordinary they never raised suspicion, a work meeting that ran long, the gym, the car at the mechanic, traffic on the way home. 7 years of Tuesdays, while Mariana, pregnant, waited for her husband at home, while Henrique put the children to bed without knowing that the woman who embraced him every day had become someone else entirely, while the children grew and Mariana's hair got shorter over the years, and Gustavo's laughter grew louder, and the little boy learned to talk, and to run, and to call Aunt Mariana his favourite. What made everything more cruel was precisely the closeness. They didn't need to hide far away. They could see each other every week in front of everyone, and nobody suspected, because the love they displayed at family gatherings was performative enough to seem real, and real enough not to seem performative. It was a lie so perfectly sewn together that not even the seams showed. Claudia would serve Henrique's plate with a wife's tenderness. Raphael would wrap his arm around Mariana's waist with a husband's warmth. The children ran barefoot in the backyard. Life continued at its Saturday rhythm, perfect and false as a photograph in a gilded frame, and Mariana photographed everything, storing memories that were already contaminated without her knowing. There are things we don't see because we can't imagine they exist. It isn't stupidity. It isn't naivety. It's that human beings have an enormous capacity to not see what would destroy them, because the mind is merciful, up until the point it no longer can be. Mariana didn't see it, because there was no room in her reality for it. She had built a world where Claudia was her sister, her safe harbour, the woman who had held her hand in the hospital when she had her daughters, who had cried alongside her at their mother's funeral, who had slept in the room next door throughout their entire childhood. That world could not contain the betrayal, so she didn't see it, until someone saw it for her. It was an ordinary Thursday in September. Henrique was in his car, stopped at a red light on some avenue, on a day that seemed absolutely identical to every other day. The radio was tuned to a soft music station. The sun was strong, but there was a pleasant breeze. He was thinking about dinner, thinking about whether Claudia would want pizza or whether he should stop by the grocery store on the way home. He picked up his phone, dialed her number. Simple as that. A husband's call, the kind a man still makes after 18 years of marriage, almost out of habit, the kind of small gesture that holds within it all the intimacy built across nearly 2 decades. She answered, distracted, said, "Hey, love," and then fell silent for a second that lasted too long. Henrique noticed she hadn't hung up. The background noise shifted. The quality of the sound changed. He stayed quiet, instinctively, not yet understanding why. Only with that strange sensation of someone who feels they have stepped on something, but hasn't yet looked down at the ground. He heard the sound of a car. He heard her voice growing more distant, as though the phone had slipped into her purse or onto the passenger seat, forgotten after a moment of distraction. And then he heard her ask, with a casual and carefree lightness he would never be able to forget, "Have you decided which motel we're going to today? Is that one near the highway fine? Or would you rather go somewhere farther?" The light turned green. Henrique didn't accelerate. He sat there until the car behind him honked once, then twice. He didn't hear it. And then he heard the answer. A voice. A voice he had known since he was 16 years old. A voice that had been the best man at his wedding, that had toasted beside him on a December night 18 years ago, saying he had never seen a more beautiful bride than Claudia. A voice that had held baby Vinicius in its arms in those first days of life, with that trembling care of someone who knows they are holding something precious and fragile. A voice that had looked down at the newborn's wrinkled red face and said, "This boy is going to be incredible, Henrique. You can count on it." Raphael's voice. Henrique doesn't know how long he sat there, in the middle of that avenue, with the phone against his ear and the world collapsing in slow motion. He knows someone honked again. He knows his hands began to shake before his mind had fully processed what he had heard. He knows he ended the call without making a sound, with an absurd carefulness, as though he were afraid they might realize he was there, as though he were the intruder in a scene he should never have witnessed. Like a ghost who discovers that the house he has been haunting was demolished long ago, and he was the only one who didn't know. He pulled the car into a gas station, sat in the parking lot for 40 minutes. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He simply stared at the windshield as though he expected the glass to give him some kind of answer. After 40 minutes, he went into the convenience store, bought what he needed for dinner, drove home, served Claudia's plate when she arrived, said, "I'm fine," when she asked if he seemed too quiet, and carried it alone in his chest for 3 days. 3 days having dinner at the same table, watching the same evening news, turning off the same light before bed. 3 days with that stone inside his chest that wouldn't go down and wouldn't come up. 3 days being the husband of a woman who had become a stranger, or perhaps had always been one, and he had simply never looked closely enough. Henrique thought about leaving without saying anything, packing his bags in silence, leaving a letter on the kitchen table and disappearing. He thought about confronting Claudia first, sitting her down with a steady voice and the right words and seeing what she would do. He thought about calling Raphael and spent 10 minutes trying to imagine what he would say before realizing there were no words for any of it. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Mariana's face. Mariana with her photographs. Mariana with her fear of forgetting happiness. Mariana who, at that very moment, was at home with her daughters, living a life that had been stolen from her 7 years ago without her ever knowing. On the following Sunday, while Claudia took the children to their grandmother's house, Enrique drove to his sister-in-law's home. It was early. The sun still had that gentle clarity of a Sunday morning, the kind of light that makes everything seem peaceful, even when it isn't. A bird sang in the tree on the sidewalk. A child rode a tricycle down the street. Mariana opened the door with a smile. She had a dish towel over her shoulder, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee drifting out behind her. She asked if he wanted a cup, if everything was all right, if the kids would be coming to the barbecue next Saturday. He walked in without answering, sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where they had celebrated birthdays, the same table where the children had done their homework on Wednesday afternoons, the same table where Mariana had served him cake so many times, with that distracted generosity of someone who takes care of others without even realizing she's doing it. He placed his phone on the wood, opened the call history, showed her the date, showed her the duration, 23 minutes, and said, with the voice that trembles when someone is trying to be honest at the moment when silence would be so much easier, "I heard everything, Mariana." She didn't understand at first. Her face made that movement of someone trying to assemble a puzzle with pieces they don't yet recognize. Her eyes went to the phone, then to Henrique's face, then back to the phone, He explained, slowly, with the painful precision of someone recounting an accident. The call, her distraction, the voice he heard, the motel, the name that didn't need to be spoken because both of them already knew it. Mariana listened to everything without moving, without crying, without breathing properly. The dish towel was still on her shoulder. The cup of coffee was growing cold on the counter. Only when Henrique finished, when he fell silent with his eyes on the floor, exhausted from carrying it for 3 days and finally having set it down. Did she say something he would never forget? 7 years. I was pregnant when it started. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a dramatic collapse. It was a whispered observation, almost to herself, like someone who has finally deciphered an equation that never added up, a number that was always wrong, and that suddenly makes sense in the worst possible way. And then she began to cry in a way Henrique had never seen anyone cry, without sound, with her face buried in her crossed arms on the table, and her shoulders shaking, as though the floor beneath her feet had vanished all at once, as though her legs no longer knew what to do without that ground beneath them. He stayed. He didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. He simply sat beside her in silence, his hand on her shoulder. Just as devastated as she was, just as groundless as she was. 2 in-laws, sitting on a Sunday morning that had destroyed everything they thought they had. Mariana didn't call Raphael. She didn't call Claudia. She didn't send a message. She didn't ask for an explanation over text. She didn't give either of them the chance to prepare, to rehearse excuses, to construct some version of events that might be more bearable than the truth. She went to her sister's house. It was 2 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon when she rang the doorbell. The sun was strong. A neighbour was washing her car in the driveway next door. Everything in the world outside was absolutely normal, which made the world inside all the more impossible to comprehend. Mariana walked in without being invited. She moved through the living room with the steps of someone who knows every inch of that house because she has spent her whole life in it, because she had slept in the back bedroom during childhood, because she had helped paint that wall when Claudia and Henrique first moved in, because she had carried boxes down that hallway and drunk wine on that porch and cried in that kitchen. She sat on the sofa, looked at her sister in a way that needed no words, but spoke anyway, with a calm that came from the other side of despair. "How long?" Claudia tried. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Her hands went to her apron, gripping the fabric. Her eyes went to the floor, to the window, to the photographs on the shelf. Mariana repeated it, more slowly, like someone who is not prepared to wait for a lie. "How long, Claudia?" And Claudia, perhaps out of exhaustion from carrying it, perhaps because she had always known this moment would come and had stopped fearing the inevitable, answered with the only true thing she had said to her sister in a very long time. 7 years. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 10 seconds. 10 seconds in which Mariana said nothing, didn't cry, didn't stand up. She simply looked at her sister with those eyes that were seeing and not seeing at the same time, like someone processing information too large to fit all at once. Then she looked at the photographs on the shelf, the family photographs, the same ones she had at home, the same smiles, the same embraces, the cottage in Ubatuba, the birthday barbecue, last Christmas with everyone gathered around the table, Gustavo with his Santa hat crooked on his head, Henrique with his glass of sparkling wine raised, Raphael with his arm around Mariana's shoulders, Claudia beside him, smiling at the camera, all of them smiling at the camera. Mariana spoke quietly, so quietly that Claudia had to lean forward to hear. "I have photographs of the 2 of you together. Hundreds of photographs. I thought I was preserving the best years of my life. She stood up, picked up her bag, walked to the door with those measured steps of someone using every last bit of energy they have to keep from collapsing in the wrong place, in front of the wrong person. At the doorway, without turning around, she said one final thing. "Don't call me. Don't text me. Don't come to my house. Give me time." And she left. There was nothing Claudia could have said that wouldn't have been one more desecration on a day that had already desecrated everything. Mariana's marriage ended that week. Raphael came home that same Sunday night. He found Mariana sitting in the living room, in the dark, with no television, no music, just sitting. When he turned on the light, she blinked like someone returning from somewhere very far away. He knew. He could see it in her face that she knew. And even so, he tried. He tried with the words that men use when there are no words. "I don't know what happened." "It wasn't what you think." "I love you," that never changed. Words that sound hollow, precisely because they are spoken at the moment when the only honest sound would be silence. Mariana listened to him. Once. Only once. She didn't interrupt. She didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. She sat looking at him with that strange attention of someone seeing a person for the last time and wanting to memorize the details. The way his right eyebrow lifted when he was nervous. The habit he had of running his hand through his hair when he didn't know what to do with his hands. When he finished, she said only, "I want you to leave tonight. I'll let you know when I'm ready to talk about the girls." It wasn't anger. It wasn't hysteria. It was the voice of someone who has made a decision so deep and so final that there was nothing left to discuss. The divorce was hard, as all divorces are when they involve young children and an entire life woven together. The girls were 5 and 8 years old. They didn't understand what had happened. They only understood that their father no longer slept at home, that their mother sometimes stared at a fixed point in the air for too long, that things had changed in a way that nobody could explain clearly enough for a 5-year-old. Mariana spent her nights lying between the two of them, waiting for them to fall asleep, feeling their breathing grow slower and deeper as sleep arrived. And then she would get up and sit in the kitchen at 3 a.m. drinking tea that went cold without her ever taking a sip. There was a specific pain she couldn't name for a long time. She tried many words: betrayal, abandonment, humiliation. But none of them came close. It was more than that. It was the pain of discovering that the version of your life you believed in was false, that the memories you had stored with such care, that you had photographed with such love, were contaminated from the inside. It wasn't only her husband's betrayal. It was her sister's. It was discovering that the person who had held her hand in the hospital when she gave birth to her daughters, who had cried alongside her at their mother's funeral, who had slept in the room next door throughout their entire childhood, that person had looked into her eyes every single week for 7 years without blinking, had served food at her table, had embraced her daughters, had said, "I love you, sis," without needing any special occasion to say it, and had lied every single time, without stopping. Claudia and Henrique separated too. Henrique filed for divorce that same week, with the cold methodology of an engineer who knows that a structure has collapsed, and there is nothing left to do but assess the damage and rebuild. There were no screams. There were no dramatic scenes. There was a man sitting at the dinner table looking at his wife of 18 years, and realizing he didn't know her. The 3 children went to live with him during the week, an arrangement Claudia accepted without fighting, because there are moments when even the instinct to fight disappears, buried under the weight of knowing that you are wrong about everything. The family that had always been together simply ceased to exist. There were no more Saturday barbecues. No more cottage in Ubatuba. Little Gustavo stopped asking for his favourite aunt because someone had explained, in the careful words adults use to spare children, that things had changed. He didn't fully understand. 8 years old is not the age for understanding these things, but he stopped asking. The way children stop asking when they sense that the question causes pain. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes after the end of something large. It isn't the loneliness of being alone in a room. It's the loneliness of sitting in a house full of evidence of a life that no longer exists. A coffee mug with his initial on it, that you haven't thrown away yet. A jacket left on the hook behind the door. A drawer full of photographs from a version of Saturday that will never come back. Mariana lived inside that loneliness for months. She worked more than she should, arriving early, leaving late, taking on projects she didn't need to take, because work occupies the hands and the mind and keeps the silence from growing too large. She slept less than she needed. She cultivated a quiet inside herself that the people around her interpreted as strength. "She's so strong," her friends would say, but that she knew was simply the sound of emptiness, the absence of something that had not yet been replaced by anything else. She was surviving, not living, surviving. There is an enormous difference between the two, and only those who have survived something truly understand what that difference feels like. End of Block 6. Continue to Block 7. What remains? The year of surviving. Mariana started therapy 4 months after everything fell apart. In the first sessions, she sat in the armchair and spoke about the situation in the third person, as though she were narrating someone else's life, as though keeping a careful distance from the story might keep it from fully belonging to her. The therapist listened without rushing her, let her circle around it, let her describe the facts before the feelings, the timeline before the wound. Only in the 5th session, when the therapist asked, with a quiet gentleness, "And you? How are you doing inside all of this?" Did Mariana cry for the first time since it all began? Not the silent, shoulder-shaking cry from the kitchen table the day Henrique told her everything. This was different. This came from somewhere deeper, somewhere that had been sealed shut for so long that when it finally opened, it opened all at once. She cried for a long time that afternoon, and when she was done, she said something that surprised even herself. "The worst part isn't what he did. The worst part is that I don't know who I am without all of it." The therapist didn't try to fix it. She simply said, "That might be the most important thing you've said so far." Mariana went back every week. She said out loud things she had never said to anyone. Not to her closest friends, not to her mother when she was alive, not even to herself in the quiet of her own thoughts. She said that she had spent 12 years being the background character in her own story, that she had confused stability with love, that she had needed everything to collapse to realize that she, alone, was more whole than she had ever allowed herself to believe, that the greatest shock wasn't discovering the betrayal. It was discovering that there was a Mariana on the other side of the betrayal who didn't know who she was without her husband, without her sister, without the Saturday family. A Mariana who had stopped existing on her own terms so long ago that she barely remembered what that version of herself felt like. She talked about her mother, about growing up in a house where love was always conditional on keeping the peace, on not making waves, on being the good daughter, the easy one, the one who smiled in the photograph and never asked for too much, about how she had carried that training into her marriage without realizing it, always making herself smaller, always accommodating, always photographing everyone else's happiness as though her own were too fragile to be looked at directly. The therapist said gently that sometimes the people who are most afraid of losing happiness are the ones who never fully believed they deserved it in the first place. Mariana sat with that for a long time. One particular Saturday in November, exactly 1 year after everything had come apart. She was tidying the drawer of the bedroom dresser when she found an old flash drive. Orange-coloured, small, the kind that used to come free with purchases years ago, and end up forgotten in drawers exactly like this one. She knew what was inside. She held it in her palm for a while, then carried it to the computer. The photographs began appearing one by one. Years of Saturday family gatherings, the cottage in Ubatuba, the barbecues, the birthdays, the Christmases, the glances she had stored with such deliberate care because she had been afraid of forgetting. She went through them slowly, one by one, waiting for it to hurt. And it did hurt, but in a different way than she had expected, because her daughters were beautiful in those photographs, growing, laughing with that wide-open laughter that only exists in childhood, before joy learns to hold itself back, running barefoot in the backyard with their cousins, sleeping curled together in the car on the way back from the beach, salt still in their hair, sand still on their feet. And Mariana realized something that her therapist had tried to say in many different ways, but that only made sense now, here, in front of these photographs. The memories were hers. The fact that the family had been built on a lie did not make her daughters a lie, did not make the laughter a lie, did not make the love she had felt, genuinely felt, with everything she had, on each one of those Saturdays, a lie. The betrayal belonged to them. The memory belonged to her. Nobody could take that from her. Not her sister, not her ex-husband, not 7 years of deception. Those laughs had existed, truly existed. That love had been real, and it belonged to her, only to her, forever. She closed the laptop, sat for a moment in the quiet of the bedroom, and felt, for the first time in a year, something that wasn't quite happiness yet, but was close enough to it, that she recognized the direction. She called Henrique that night. They rarely spoke since the end of everything. But when they did, there was between them a strange and wordless understanding. The understanding of two survivors of the same disaster, who don't need to explain anything to each other because they already know, because they were both in the wreckage, because they both lost something that can't be fully named. "Are you doing okay?" he asked, and she answered, for the first time in a year, with something that was neither yes nor no, but was more honest than either. "I'm learning." They were quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I keep thinking about Gustavo, about Amanda, about Vinicius. They didn't do anything wrong. I know," he said. "I know. We could take the kids to the beach. It doesn't have to be the same cottage. It doesn't have to be family. It could just be the kids." Another pause. Then simply, "It could." Mariana's new beginning had no fanfare. There was no specific day on which she woke up and felt healed, felt the hole had closed, felt life had returned to what it once was. Healing doesn't work that way, and anyone who has ever needed it knows this. Healing is slow, uneven, full of good days followed by bad nights, of small advances that cost everything and painful setbacks that arrive when you least expect them, on an ordinary Tuesday triggered by a song on the radio or a smell in a grocery store or a photograph that falls out of a book you forgot you owned. But it was real. The girls grew. The eldest started high school and discovered she loved theatre. That first butterfly play with the crooked wings had planted a seed that took years to break through the surface. But when it did, it bloomed without apology. She auditioned for the school play and got the lead role, and Mariana sat in the third row on opening night and cried in exactly the same way she had cried years ago, for the same reason and a completely different one. The youngest began learning guitar and filled the house with chords that were still uncertain but full of intention, the beautiful, patient sound of someone becoming. Some evenings, Mariana would stop whatever she was doing and simply stand in the hallway and listen, and feel something move inside her chest that she had almost forgotten was still there. She was coming back to herself. Slowly. With the patience of someone who understands there are no shortcuts. She started photographing again, not with the old anxiety of capturing happiness before it slipped away. That particular ache had gone, departed quietly somewhere along the way without announcing its exit. She photographed now with a lightness she hadn't known before, the lightness of someone who has understood that the photograph is not the memory. It is only the reminder that a moment existed, and that existing was always enough. She photographed her daughters asleep on the couch, tangled together like they were still small. She photographed the coffee going cold on a Sunday morning while she read. She photographed the tree outside the kitchen window, changing with the seasons, because she had passed it every day for years without ever really seeing it, and now she saw it. She was learning to look at her own life without fear. Claudia sent a letter, handwritten 6 pages long, on paper that Mariana recognized immediately. It was from the same notepad their mother had left behind when she died, that blue-covered one that neither of them had ever been able to throw away because throwing it away would mean something neither of them was ready for. Mariana looked at the envelope for 2 days before opening it. When she did, she read every word, from the beginning to the end, without skipping a single line. There were apologies, many. There were explanations. Attempts at them, at least, the honest kind that don't try to justify but simply try to account for. There was the confession that Claudia had tried to end it several times over the years and hadn't been able to, and that this didn't make anything less grave, and that she knew it. There was a paragraph about their mother, about childhood, about things that had nothing and everything to do with what had happened. And there was one sentence that Mariana read 3 times, sitting very still at the kitchen table. I hurt you, the way only someone who loves you deeply is capable of hurting you. And there is no repairing that. But I needed you to know that I always loved you, even when I was being the worst possible version of myself. Mariana folded the letter carefully, placed it in the drawer. She didn't respond. Not because there was nothing left to say. There was an entire lifetime of things to say. But she had learned, in therapy, in the books she had read during sleepless nights, in conversations with friends who had drawn closer after the collapse, the way certain people do when they see someone they care about finally fall apart. She had learned that forgiving doesn't mean reopening, that it is possible to release someone without returning to them the place they once occupied, that some doors close not out of anger, but out of necessity, and that necessity is not cruelty. It is simply the honest acknowledgement that some things, once broken in a particular way, become something different when they are put back together. Not worse, necessarily, just different. And sometimes different means separate. Claudia would not become the older sister she had been before, but Mariana would not become the woman she had been before either. They had become different people, who no longer needed to recognize themselves in each other's reflection. Raphael and Claudia never got together. That is what the logic of drama would expect, isn't it? That the betrayal would become a grand forbidden love, that the guilt would become fuel for something epic, something that at least justified the magnitude of the destruction. But life rarely honors the logic of drama. They had been a betrayal, not a love. And betrayals, when exposed to the light, rarely survive the weight of being exactly what they are, stripped of the secrecy that had sustained them. Without the secret, there was nothing there. Raphael rebuilt his relationship with his daughters over time. It was slow. It was difficult. The girls grew up with that strange space inside the house where their father had been, and then wasn't, and they filled that space in their own ways. with silence sometimes, with anger in the years when anger was the only honest language available, and eventually, when they were old enough, with a forgiveness that was entirely their own and had nothing to do with their mother. Mariana didn't stand in the way of it, because her daughters were not a punishment for anyone. That was, perhaps, the hardest thing she did in this entire story. Harder than the confrontation with her sister. Harder than asking Raphael to leave. Harder than the 3 a.m. kitchens with the cold tea and the silence that pressed against the walls. Letting her daughters love their father, even after everything. That was the moment she understood, quietly and without ceremony, that she was going to be all right. 3 years after the day everything collapsed. Mariana is at the beach with her daughters. A different cottage this time, in Il Habela. She had chosen deliberately. A place with no memory, no layers, no ghost of a version of Saturday that no longer existed. Rented just for the 3 of them. It is Saturday. The sun is the way she likes it. Warm, but with a breeze that comes in off the water and moves across her face like a reminder that the world is still beautiful. The girls are in the ocean up to their waists, both of them, laughing at something Mariana couldn't quite hear from here. Some private joke between sisters that needs no witness to be funny. The kind that will be retold for decades and get funnier every time. She's sitting in the sand, barefoot, with a book in her lap that she isn't reading, because sometimes the best thing a book can do is give you an excuse to sit still and look at your life. She's looking at her daughters. She takes her phone from her pocket, opens the camera. The girls have their backs to her. They don't know they are being photographed. Their hair is wet. The sun is on their backs, that laugh that only exists when no one is posing for anyone. She could think about everything this image carries, about everything that came before it, about everything that was lost, about everything it cost to arrive here, on this particular square of sand, on this particular Saturday afternoon, with these 2 particular human beings who are the best thing she has ever done. But she doesn't do that. She takes the photograph and smiles, because in the end, the story was never about the betrayal. It was about the woman who remained after it passed, and that woman, Mariana finally understood, was worth so much more than any old photograph could ever show. The shards of a shattered life can, with time and courage, become a mosaic more honest than the original mirror ever was. My dears, tell me in the comments what you thought of this story, what lesson we can learn from it, and do you think she made the right decision, and ready for the next story? I hope to see you there. Kisses to your hearts, and may God be with you.